Hey YouTubers, it's me, Lonnie Clark. Nuts for Art, Love Beyond Extinction, or Beyond Extinction Love. Love Beyond Extinction, I think, is actually the handle name, but the channel name is Beyond Extinction Love. And I'm going to do another reading of Black Like Me. And this is kind of an experiment this morning because I'm reading in the morning instead of at night because my sister told me I sound too tired at night. So I thought I'd read in the morning and see if anybody notices a difference, or maybe it's just that I'm not a professional reader and I don't really actually make it sound that great. I don't know. But I thought I'd try something different. So I am going to continue reading. We're on page 141. And if you recall, we left off with that completely fabulous quote by Mr. T.M. Alexander, a black businessman who was involved in this conversation. His quote was, as Alexander stated, "If we know anything, it is that if virtues do not equal power, the powers will be misused." That statement, frankly, has stuck in my head because that is exactly where we're at today in our political sphere. Powers are definitely being misused. Okay, let's get going. Page 141. About 25 years ago, two men came to Atlanta to teach in the university system. Both were economists. They found Atlanta a thriving intellectual center for the Negro. In the slave years, any attempt at literacy among Negroes was severely punished. In some communities, a Negro's right hand was mutilated if he learned to read or write. The Negro, therefore, prized education as the only doorway into the world of knowledge and dignity to which he aspired. The climate was right to begin a program that would lead them to economic respectability. L.D. Milton and J.B. Blayton, the two economists, recognized that so long as the Negro had to depend on white banks to finance his projects for improvement and growth, he was at the mercy of the white man. They recognized the economic emancipation was the key to the racial solution. So long as the race had to depend on a basically hostile source for financing, it would not advance, since the source would simply refuse loans for any project that did not meet with its approval. These two men said, in essence, let everyone in the community pool what little resources he has with others. By uniting the small power of small sums, by skillfully manipulating it, they could achieve a consolidated financial power. This action resulted in the founding of two banks in Atlanta. Recently, I discovered an instance arose where the Negro leaders used their economic leverage in a typical manner. It became necessary for the Negro community to expand its physical limits. An area of right residences served as a bottleneck. The housing committee met, and Negroes and whites alike agreed to have Negroes purchase this block of homes. The white lending agencies, however, refused to make the loans. As usual, the Negro leaders called a meeting to discuss what might be done. They agreed to set aside a large sum of money from which applicants could make loans to buy these houses. After 4 such loans were made, the white lending agencies called and said, "Don't take all that business away from us. How about letting us handle a few of those loans?" Business that had been refused a few days previously was now welcomed. But though financing is the key, other elements are no less important. Education, housing, job opportunities, and the vote enter the picture of any improving community. The Negro leader, the successful man in Atlanta, is deeply imbued with a sense of responsibility towards his community. This is true of the doctors, the lawyers, the educators, the religious leaders, and the businessmen. There is no big me and little you, T.M. Alexander, one of the founders of the Southeastern Fidelity Fire and Insurance Company, said. We must pool all our resources, material and mental, to gain the respect that will enable all of us to walk the streets with the dignity of American citizens. In the matter of education, Atlanta has long been eminent, with men of quality of Benjamin Mays, president of Morehouse, and Rufus Clement, president of Atlanta University, to mention only two who are world-renowned. The intellectual climate is of high quality. The most impressive proof is this is found in classrooms where teachers and students face squarely the problems that haunt this country, particularly the race problem. I visited the sociology class of Spielman College, where Dr. Moreland, Mrs. Charles Moreland, bullied and taunted and challenged her class to think and talk. This handsome and brilliant woman, like her students, despises the idea that in America, any man has to earn his rights to first-class citizenship. But she and her colleagues believe, on the other hand, that every citizen has to live up to his duties of citizenship. In the classes I attended, one of the students was assigned to take the role of the white racist and to argue his points to the other students. It was a brutal and revealing session. The comparison between them and the white racist was cruel indeed. The students have better manners, more learning, more courtesy, and infinitely more understanding. Every leader is interested in better housing. Many professional men, particularly doctors like F. Earl McClendon, had developed residential areas as their contribution to the cause. Atlanta has virtually miles and miles of splendid Negro homes. They have destroyed the cliche that whenever Negroes move into an area, the property values go down. In every instance, they have improved the homes they have bought from the whites and built even better ones. The philosophy here is simple. Try to anchor as many Negroes as possible in their own homes. The fourth element, the vote, the right of the governed to govern themselves, has long been cherished goal of all thinking men of Atlanta. Every business, professional, and civic leader is also a leader in politics. In 1949, the Democrats, under A.T. Walden, and Republicans, under John Wesley Dobbs, united to form the Atlanta Negro Voters League, and the Negro began to have a voice in his government. It has become an increasingly important and responsible one. By 1955, this type of political action helped elect Atlanta University President Rufus E. Clement to the city school board, making him the first Negro to hold elective office in Georgia since the Reconstruction. 1955, you guys. Imagine that. All take into account the cooperation of a fair-minded city administration under the leadership of Mayor Hartsfield. Almost alone among politicians of the South, Mayor Hartsfield has not sunk to the level of winning votes at the Negro's expense. He has proved the point that a man can, after all, stand up for justice and constitutional law and not sacrifice his political career. Benjamin Mays, J.B. Blayton, L.D. Milton, A.T. Walden, John Wesley Dobbs, Norris Herndon at the Atlantic Life Insurance Company, banker druggist C.R. Yates, W.J. Shaw, E.M. Martin, Reverend Samuel Williams, Reverend William Holmes Border, Reverend H.I. Bearden, Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and his son, Martin Luther King Jr., each has contributed and continues to contribute to the American dream in its best sense. I recall scenes picked at random. The look of growing concern and perhaps humiliation on photographer Don Rutledge's face as we move from one scene to another. Concern and humiliation to realize that these men, these scenes, these ideals were unknown to most Americans and utterly beyond comprehension of the racist Southern racist. It was a look, however, overspread with delight. The look of surprise and vast amusement on Dr. Benjamin J. May's intelligent face when I confided to him my journey as a Negro. At Spelman College, hearing Rosalind Pope play magnificently the Bach Toccata in D, and then the strange, bewildered expression on her face when she told me about arriving in Paris to spend a year studying piano. The strangeness of living in a great city where she could attend concerts to her fill, where she could walk into any door where she was a human being first and last and not dismissed as a Negro. The evening in T.M. Alexander's home, the talk with his wife and brilliant children. We realize that we have to run just to keep up. They are intent, like other members of the community, upon doing everything within their power to nullify the picture of the loud, the brassy, the pushy, the successful Negro. The long talk with Reverend Samuel Williams in his living room, a forceful man, but quiet, of fine intellect, professor of philosophy. I spent years, he told me, studying the phenomenon of love. And I spent years studying the phenomenon of justice. At base, we spend years studying the same thing. Amen to that. It was time to return to New Orleans. My assignments in Atlanta with Rutledge were finished. He was anxious to get back to his wife and child. I asked him if he knew a first-rate photographer in New Orleans, since I wanted to go back over the terrain again as a Negro and have photos made. The project fascinated him, and we arranged to drive to New Orleans together so he could photograph it. December 9th. In New Orleans, I resumed my Negro identity, and we went to all my former haunts to photograph them. Getting photos proved a problem. A Negro being photographed by a white arouses suspicions. Whites tend to wonder, what Negro celebrity is he? And presumed I was uppity. It equally aroused curiosity among the Negroes. The Uncle Toms think that every Negro should bury his head in the sand and pretend he is not there. They distrust any Negro prominent enough to be photographed by a white photographer. Others feared I might be an Uncle Tom going over to the white side. We had to arrange to be at the same spot at the same time, but pretended to have no relationship. Rutledge appeared to be simply another tourist taking pictures, and I just happened to be in them. One day we got unexpected help. He approached a fruit stand in the French market and began taking photographs. I walked up from another direction and bought some walnuts and an apple. The elderly and civil woman waited on me while another woman talked to him some distance away. She said, "Why don't you hurry up and get the picture of that funny old nigger before he leaves?" Rutledge said he believed he would, and I, pretending to be unaware of the plot, obliged by hanging around the fruit stalls. An hour later, he went to the fish market. I showed interest in buying a fish, and at that moment, Rutledge walked up and asked the vendor if he minded being photographed with some of the fish. The vendor was delighted. He left me standing at the counter and went to pose with a giant fish in his hand. I followed, pretending to think that this was the fish he would sell me. Trying not to be impolite to me, he nevertheless maneuvered every possible way to keep me out of the picture, and finally, when I stuck close to him, he became irritated and told me customers weren't allowed behind the counter. Then when Rutledge said, "That's good right there, hold it," the man faced front and gave his most winning smile. A nod from Rutledge told me we had enough pictures, so we drifted away and out the door. We returned to the shoe stand, where we had no problem since my old partner, Sterling Williams, was intelligent and knowledgeable. Otherwise, we had to take pictures quickly and disappear before a crowd gathered and began to ask questions. The experience of subtler points did not escape Rutledge. Having a Negro for a companion took him inside the problem. He could avail himself of any restroom, any water fountain, any cafe for a cup of coffee, but he could not take me with him. Needless to say, he was too much of a gentleman to do this, and there were times when where we went without that cup of coffee or that glass of water. December 14th. Finally, the photos were taken, the project concluded, and I resumed for the final time, my white identity. I felt strangely sad to leave the world of the Negro after having shared it so long, almost as though I were fleeing my share of his pain and heartache. December 15th, Mansfield, Texas. I sat in the jet this afternoon, flying home from New Orleans, and looked out the window at the patterns of the December countryside far below. I felt the greatest love for this land and the deepest dread of the task that now lay before me, the task of telling truths that would make me and my family the target of all the hate groups. But for the moment, the joyful expectation of seeing my wife and children again after 7 weeks overwhelmed all my feelings. When the plane landed, I hurried to collect my books and walked out front. The car soon arrived, with children waving and shouting from the windows. I felt their arms around my neck, their hugs and marvelous jubilation of reunion. In the midst of it, the picture of prejudice and bigotry from which I had just come flashed into my mind. I heard myself mutter, "My God, how can men do it when there are things like this in the world?" The faces of my wife and mother spoke their relief that it was finally over. That night was a festival. The country was aromatic with late autumn, with the love of family, with the return to light and affection. We talked little about the experience. It was too near, too sore. We talked with the children about the cats and the farm animals. January 2. Mr. Leviathan, the owner of Cephia, called and asked me to come in for an editorial conference with Mrs. Jackson. Though the magazine had paid for the trip, and I in turn promised them some articles about it, he gave me the opportunity to back out. "It'll cause trouble," he said. "We don't want to see you killed. What do you think? Hadn't we better forget the whole thing?" "Do you mean you're willing to cancel this after all you've been led to expect?" I asked. "The only way I'll run it is if you insist," he said. "Then I think we must run it," I said, wishing with all my heart I could drop it. However, Sepia, like many magazines, is widely read in the Deep South by Negroes. I felt it was the best way of letting them know that their condition was known, that the world knew more about them than they suspected, the best way to give them hope. The world would know then in early March. It was January. I had 2 months left in which to work before the storm would break. February 26th. The time drew close. The news became known. I had spent weeks at work studying correlating statistics, going through reports, none of which actually would help to reveal the truth of what it was like to be discriminated against. They cancel truth almost more than they reveal it. I decided to throw them away and simply publish what happened to me. A call came from Hollywood. Paul Coates spoke to me, asked me to fly out and be on his interview program. I accepted. I'm going to stop here. We're at March 14th. And I think we're almost done with this book, you guys. So I don't know about you, but I am really shocked that white supremacists are still, that they even have a stronghold. That the scourge of white supremacy is even a conversation. And that, frankly, the white supremacists are embedded in the White House again and in every level of government. It is just shocking that we don't have any decent leadership right now. But that's why I'm reading this book. Put your courage feet on, you guys. I don't know if it made a difference if I'm reading in the morning, but I think I'm going to continue with this scene. Talk to you guys later. Ciao.